All right, we are live. Hello, friends. Hello, anyone who's here live. Hello, anyone who is watching in the future. If you want to drop in the chat and just say hi. Uh-oh, oh no. Who's here live. Hello, anyone who is watching in the future. If you want to drop in the chat and just say hi. Oh no, I have an echo here. What is going on with that? Sorry, guys. For some reason, my voice is coming back at me, which has not happened any other time. Sorry, guys. For some reason, my voice is coming back at me, which has not happened any other time. Seems like a classic Mercury retrograde experience, but I'm really not sure how to fix it. Oh, okay, I think I might have fixed it. Sorry about that. Yes, I fixed it. So anyway, welcome. If you are here, if you want to drop in the chat and say hi, let us know what lands you're dropping in from. Let us know how the Mercury retrograde is feeling for you, or anything else you want to share. That is always welcome. We're in some super interesting astrological energy, so I'm just going to touch into that before I get into everything else. As you all probably know, Mercury just stationed retrograde, so it's basically just standing still right now. It's still in the storm phase at 15 degrees of Leo. We also have just moved through a square between Venus, or is that still approaching? Venus and Mars. Yeah, that square is actually still approaching, but Mars is exactly conjunct the South Node right now. The exact square between Venus and Mars is coming up over the next couple of days. The Sun just squared Chiron over the past couple of days. That's slowly starting to fade right now. The moon just moved into Gemini, always an interesting energy as well. And in the background, we have this long, slow grind of the outer planets. So we have Pluto, Neptune, Saturn, and Uranus all in the super early degrees of different signs. Pluto and Uranus in a trine to each other, Neptune and Saturn sextiling both Pluto and Uranus. It's just like very gritty astrology, I feel like. Venus and Mars squaring each other just makes it extra. Mercury retrograde kind of already makes it confusing, just makes everything confusing. But Venus and Mars in particular can make it feel like there's a tug of war between when you should take action versus when you should be more passive and receptive. And then Mercury retrograde just makes it hard to find any kind of clarity in your mind. And I've been saying from the beginning of the year, 2025 is a liminal year. And as we'll get into today, talking about J.D. Vance's astrology, something could shift in a really big way next year. And then maybe even more during the third Uranus return, 2027 to 2028. So right now, not only do we have that kind of gritty trine sextile between all of these outer planets, a bunch of them are retrograde. Pluto's retrograde, Saturn and Neptune are both retrograde. And so I feel like the liminality of this year is really, really present in kind of that background energy that the outer planets speak to. It can just feel like you are trying to push something forward and the energy is just going into a void. Mars conjunct the South Node can feel like that also. So yeah, it's a lot. And also, before we get into the meat of this particular video, a couple announcements. So I am working on my third Uranus and Gemini video. If anyone is wondering about that, I'm a little bit behind the time schedule. I was hoping to release it on, but it has taken longer than I expected to get my ideas in a somewhat coherent form. There's a lot of research to do on the subject matter of effective accelerationism and breakaway civilizations and all of the other things I'm talking about. I also don't want it to be like a 2-hour video, so I'm really having to summarize and in some cases like gloss over a lot of places where there are deeper rabbit holes that I could go. I feel like this is also a traditional Mercury station experience, but the script is almost done, so I hope to have that out before next Sunday. And again, my workshop is coming up next Saturday. So if you want to really be rooted in the astrological history of technology and the big tech companies that dominate our lives today, and if you want to feel like you are not just kind of drifting in the historical currents that the psychopathic billionaires are creating for us, if you want to feel like you have some agency and some orientation inside of that, I invite you to come to Astrology and the Rise of Big Tech, the workshop that I'm giving next Saturday. It's a 90-minute workshop. It's a history that starts with the Uranus-Neptune conjunction in the early 90s, which corresponds to the birth of the World Wide Web, which of course was the set of code that brought the internet into all aspects of our lives pretty much. And then we explore how the Uranus transits since then have each corresponded to a different phase in the evolution of technology in general and also the big tech companies specifically. So it really relates to everything that's happening today, all of the ways that things are moving at such a kind of fast and hard to grasp pace, from the crypto explosion to the increasing wealth inequality to people and their social media addictions to the rapid fire news cycle to influencer culture. All of that is a piece of this history and really stunningly explained by the astrology. So I don't know. I feel like anyone who wants to consider themselves versed in astrology should have this history. If you want to be ahead of the curve, join us. There is a link in the description box here to sign up for that. Also, if you want to support my work on this channel, please like this video. Please join the channel membership or subscribe if you're not subscribed to the channel. You can follow me on Instagram. You can sign up for my monthly newsletter. All of those links are maybe not in the description box right now, but I will put them there afterwards. Okay, so let's get into today's collapse times. We are going to start as usual with a quick check-in from last week's oracle card pulls. So last week I pulled Chiron from the Alchemy deck and the Kiss from the Archetype deck. Last week I did basically a primer on Jeffrey Epstein, kind of a Jeffrey Epstein 101. And if you're interested in that, I definitely recommend checking out that video from last week. But then I pulled these cards at the end and I kind of didn't have anything to say about them. Somebody else in the comments pointed out that Chiron square the sun was coming up. But also somebody after this live stream commented how much these energies relate to the Jeffrey Epstein situation, and particularly maybe the experience of the victims hearing Trump and his administration say, move on from this, stop paying attention to this. So definitely, the Kiss brought up themes of intimacy. And then Chiron, of course, we have a wound. We have the wounded healer archetype, and we have something that's very tender and sensitive and, can be very painful. So that definitely resonates. And I did not put that together when I pulled the cards, but shout out, I think that was Emily in the comments who pointed that out. Yeah, and I'm not going to get into it today, but it is kind of interesting, this thing with the birthday card or whatever that came out in the Wall Street Journal. I almost at first sniff. I don't even maybe think that that's real, but I don't know. I have to do the research before I comment on it. But definitely on the side of the victims, some very tender energies. Oh yeah, the Kiss Cam CEO incidents. I kind of, am annoyed at how much press that got. This couple at a Coldplay concert that are having an affair and got put on the jumbotron or whatever, like hugging each other. But they're yeah, actually that does very much align with these cards. Thanks for pointing that out, Lisa. um yeah, and I mean, like I said, we are just moving out of the Sun Chiron square, and that's a very tender energy, especially with the Sun in Cancer. And I just want to name, even though I'm not going to really talk about it today, like the continuing horrific, heartbreaking tragedy happening in Gaza and the starvation now of the Gaza citizens by Israel. And I don't even know what to say about that. It's just so fucking sad and so fucking horrific. And there's just so much soul rot in American political leadership that I am not surprised on many levels, because before October 7th, I was already pretty deep into the horrors that were underlying America's like nice veneer, but it still continues to just shake me to my core. Like the I think of AOC a lot, and like just such a weird thing with like Marjorie Taylor Greene standing up for something, speaking, having fuck her in a lot of ways, but like it takes some courage to do what she's doing, to just stand up and like clearly speak to the problems with Israel. And then we have AOC who just like can't do that and just like, voted to not stop sending some little chunk. It was only $500 million. It's not even like it's only a small fraction of the military assistance that we send them, but like she couldn't even symbolically take that step. And yeah, there's just such a deep soul rot in our leadership. And yeah, it's so heartbreaking. I'm on Instagram a little bit less these days, so I am sharing a little bit. I used to kind of post stuff about Gaza to my stories every day, and I haven't been doing that as much lately. But I still see it every time I'm on and just feel so horrified and heartbroken and powerless in so many ways. So that feels like Sun squaring Chiron to me. Just kind of the rush of the, late Cancer energy, big emotions, big empathy coming out. So yes, just didn't want to go without naming that and sending whatever kind of prayers we all can to the people in Palestine. Whew, okay. Now let's get into it. So, a couple of interesting things happened this week regarding Donald Trump. There's new footage from the Butler, Pennsylvania rally where he, there was supposedly an assassination attempt against him. And I'm going to say a little bit more about that later. Also, it was announced that he has been diagnosed with a very mild and benign medical condition called chronic venous insufficiency. And I did put on the little thumbnail for this live stream picture of his ankles overflowing over his shoes. This is not a rare thing. This is not, people with diabetes or other circulatory issues have this kind of thing, even if they're, not as old as Trump. It's not a huge deal in general. It's not necessarily, from anything that I've read, an indication that he's like quickly on his way out. from what I hear from stuff that other people tell me, there are some astrologers out there who are just kind of constantly predicting Trump's demise. And I haven't seen that in the astrology. Even now, we're going to talk about it a tiny bit, but there's nothing in the astrology that like makes me feel like Trump's demise is extremely imminent. But let me go ahead and pull up his transit chart real quick here. So a couple of acute transits that are happening for him, maybe the most direct is Jupiter has just been transiting his Mercury, still pretty much there. I think this does relate to all of the Epstein stuff and, this birthday card, whether that is real or not. It's just kind of like a magnification of his mind and his, obviously the way that he was speaking about Epstein, telling people to move on, saying there's nothing here, like that's his Mercury, like coming out, kind of being amplified, and then people did not like what they see. Jupiter can have kind of a revelatory effect, and so this just kind of like brought some stuff out into the open that, especially on the conservative side, we talked about this a little bit last week, but like people couldn't do the mental gymnastics to like keep following his logic there. And we also have the sun that's been transiting his Saturn-Venus conjunction this past week, and that also feels pretty similar, pretty relevant to this birthday card. Longer term, the transit that probably relates most directly to his health is Pluto in his 6th house. And I mean, Trump's health is weird in general, right? It's weird how he can be as healthy as he is at almost 80 years old. Like, even just showing up every day, as much as he's definitely senile, if you listen to him speak, now versus in 2016, you can hear the difference in his coherency for sure. So there's definitely some of that, although sorry to whoever like wants to think that he has the same kind of cognitive decline as Biden. I don't think it's quite that. At least not at this point, not like a full-on neurodegeneration like what was going on for Biden. But Pluto in the 6th house, of course, any Pluto transit is a once-in-a-lifetime transit. Transits to the 6th house, especially something like Pluto or Saturn or Chiron in your 6th house, it will surface the effects of bad habits. And, for someone of Trump's age and, his eating habits of Diet Coke and cheeseburgers, like this is a long transit, but I mean, he probably won't make it out of this one alive. Maybe, I didn't check the date, but like he has his Pluto opposition coming. Pluto, for anyone who's curious, does have an elliptical orbit, so it takes a shorter time to go from Leo to Aquarius than it does from Aquarius to Leo. But anyway, Pluto, someone in their Pluto opposition, someone coming in for their Uranus return, like it's just totally bizarre that that person is president. But at the time that Pluto gets to 10 degrees of Aquarius, if I were going to make a prediction based on astrology about Trump's actual death, that's like the timeline that I would work with, but who knows? There can be things that are a lot more acute. And like even Jupiter will come to align with his Venus and Saturn later on this year. And Jupiter transits are often seen in death charts. So maybe Jupiter conjunct his Saturn. Let me actually check when exactly that's happening. I forget if Jupiter stations retrograde before that degree. So Jupiter is conjunct Trump's Saturn on October 13th of this year, and it basically is stationing there, I guess. So between like October and December, it's hanging out right on his Saturn-Venus conjunction. So, okay, so that's another timeline you could work with if you want to, have some kind of prediction around when things might end for Trump. But outside of these timelines, maybe just of a natural death for Donald Trump, let's talk a little tiny bit about the assassination attempt. I was going to pull up the chart for this and get more into it, and it seems more important to cover Vance right now because I just feel like something is very imminent with him, and I want to be naming it as early as I can. But also, regarding that assassination attempt at the Butler rally last year, my take on it is almost just too tinfoil hat to even share. But I will say a teeny bit about it here. I know a lot of people think that Trump himself staged that, and that has never been my read from the very beginning when it happened up until now. I do not think that he was in on it. Now, that doesn't mean I don't think that there is a conspiracy. So clearly, many people were in on that. The Secret Service, definitely. So much fishy with their role in that whole event. There's a video that I shared in my stories. It is still in my stories archive. I originally found it on Reddit. I've never seen it circulating anywhere else, but it's a video that shows a woman sitting in the front row of the rally right behind Trump. And when the sound of the bullets ring out, you see this woman smile. And it's really weird. And then the chart for the assassination also has Lilith on the midheaven. I now forget if it's on the midheaven or on the very bottom of the chart, but a very prominent Lilith. So I have, this is part of just my tinfoil theory that, maybe this woman was involved in creating Thomas Crooks as a sort of patsy. So from my research into various deep events and my kind of autistic pattern recognition abilities, Thomas Crooks has all the markers of a patsy. And then there's this new footage that came out this past week that is from behind Trump, a little bit to the side and behind. And it shows photographers, instead of them pushing photographers out of the way, there's a uniformed guy who's ushering them into place. Also, obviously, the way that Trump's ear healed is very weird. It doesn't really seem like there was a bullet that struck his ear. There's the whole thing with the White House photographer, Pete Salza, who posted a picture of his ear, a few weeks after, I think, and it looked totally fine, and he was kind of questioning it, and then after that he deleted his account on Twitter. There's a lot that's really, really weird about it, but yeah, it's too much for me to try to explain my full take. Even all the stuff I have written here, if I were going to try to fully go into it, I would have to explain so many different pieces of the patterns I notice and where they come from. So I'll just leave it at that for now, but it is super weird. This new footage doesn't make it any less weird. But what I will say is that my tinfoil hat take does feel super affirmed by the way that things have gone in the Trump administration so far, right up to this recent Epstein debacle. If you follow the UAP stuff, you know that Trump made a lot of promises about getting to the bottom of what the drones have been that have been over, sensitive American military installations. He made a lot of promises about getting clear about that. And then there's just been basically silence from him and even from the congressional representatives that were supposed to be digging into that stuff more. So that's another piece that it just feels to me like Trump is not really in control of anything. He is a useful tool for the deep state, and that's even kind of a funny word to use at this point because I feel like they're not really that deep anymore. They're really emerging. The deep state is rising, as I have been saying for a few years. But they're keeping him around just as long as he's useful. And they have JD Vance waiting in the wings. So I have said for a long time, even back in Trump's first term, I've been saying and thinking that the thing that scares me more than Trump is that there could be a more charismatic, less buffoonish, smarter, more diabolical right-wing leader to come in and, kind of harness the same under the surface viciousness that has always been here in America. And I feel like that definitely could be JD Vance. So real quick, for anyone who doesn't know, Vance is an acolyte of Peter Thiel, and he's deeply connected to the effective accelerationism movement. So they don't define themselves this way. They define themselves as techno-optimists and people who think that technology can solve all the world's problems. But in practice, effective accelerationism is, it's a philosophy of tech billionaires who openly don't believe in democracy and who want to walk away from democratic society and from any obligation to pay taxes, from any regulation. And with their enormous resources, they're building underground bunkers. Some of them are into seasteading. They're creating these freedom cities like Prospera. And their philosophy is that they will let the world burn while a very tiny elite few themselves survive. So the third Uranus and Gemini video that I'm working on is mostly about that. And you should also really read the piece on End Times Fascism by Naomi Klein and Astra Taylor in The Guardian from April. That gives all you need to know about this philosophy. But Vance is one of these guys. He is a believer in that philosophy, and whether it is in 2028 or before, it's definitely part of these people's plan to have him as president. So I'm going to pull up first Trump and Vance together. We'll just look at that for a minute because it's a pretty interesting alignment. So they have Vance's ascendant is 27 Leo and Trump's ascendant is 29 Leo. And Vance has a ton of Leo. All these are Vance's Leo placements in the 12th house, which I'll get into more. But they have too much Leo to get along. It's too much narcissism. So I bet that they can barely stand each other. Trump chose Vance because of the billionaire backing and that power that came along with having Vance as his vice president. But I just think that they are probably two magnetic north poles that have so much similar energy that they just repel each other. They also both have the North Node in Gemini, South Node in Sagittarius, and Gemini placements in the 10th house. So public liars, basically, public manipulators. South Node in Sag is really interesting. They both come karmically from, a lot of past life experience with fundamentalism and, that kind of shadow side of Sag that can be very zealous and believe, just so strongly in one philosophy, very dogmatic. They both also have the South Node in the 4th house, which maybe relates to abusive experiences they both had as kids. And then if we look at Vance's chart on its own, this is wild, right? All of this 12th house Leo, the Sun, Juno, Nessus, Vesta, and Venus, all in the 12th house in Leo, as well as a Leo ascendant. And I just read this as him being extremely diabolical. So Juno, Nessus, and Vesta are all conjunct. Venus is not far away. There's definitely something related to the feminine here, and it also squares his Mars and Scorpio at the bottom of the chart. So I do think that he's like a wife beater, and there have been some pictures that I saw of Usha Vance. It was at the RNC, but I tried to find these pictures a little bit before I got on here, and I couldn't. Everything I found had, it looked just very filter. Like her skin was like smooth and vibrant, but the pictures that I was seeing at the time of the RNC, she looked just horrible, and she looked like she had makeup covering bruises on her face, and her eyes just looked really dead. It was really hard not to see her as like a battered woman. So I think this, Mars and Scorpio at the very bottom of the chart speaks to some pretty shady shit that he probably does in private. But with this 12th house, all these 12th house energies, on top of that, I think there's something else as well, like some kind of a dark possession. And it makes me think of how Pope Francis died the day after meeting him. Not that he caused that, but just like, I don't know, that Pope Francis like looked into his eyes and was like, oh my God, the Antichrist is here, like time to get out, or something like that. Nessus has to do with power and abuses of power. And it just feels like there's some like very dark spiritual attachment here, some kind of dark force lodged in his subtle bodies. And it makes me think of Leslie Wexner's Dybbuk. That's probably only a reference that people will get if they have read Whitney Webb's Jeffrey Epstein books or like listened to interviews where she talks about this, but you can look it up. There is a article in like New York Magazine or some very mainstream magazine. Les Wexner was Jeffrey Epstein's kind of main like financial sponsor, or more like Epstein was in charge of all of Wexner's finances. He was the head, like the CEO of the Limited, and a billionaire. And I guess he's still alive, but there's this article from sometime in like the early 2000s, and it's just this very mainstream article, but he like very kind of proudly talks about being possessed by an evil spirit, basically. So this just kind of reminds me of that. What I really want to talk about with Vance, though, is his transits. I'll take away the asteroids here just to keep it a little simpler. Oh my gosh. You propose that I bust out all the industrial strength tinfoil hat. Oh my God. Okay. If you want it, maybe I'll do it. I love that you guys do like that. I'll have to put the tinfoil hat on. I feel like it's good spiritual protection for going off the deep end. So, okay. So Vance has had Uranus transiting his midheaven over the past several years, and at the same time squaring all of his 12th house Leo placements. And so this timeline of Uranus on his midheaven probably corresponds to his radicalization. Hillbilly Elegy was published in 2016, so that was a couple years before Uranus moved into Taurus. And there was a couple years there where he was kind of like a liberal darling, right? But he started his political career, I guess it was 2022 that he was elected to the Senate. So like a few years into Uranus and Taurus, he was starting to get radicalized into an ultra-conservative viewpoint and into this like effective accelerationism philosophy, and connected with the tech billionaires. So I think he was a senator for like 2 years before he became president or vice president. And So at the same time, Uranus was very visibly crossing his midheaven, so there was this very visible radicalization. It was also squaring all of this 12th house stuff. So there's also an activation of the dark forces lodged in his 12th house subtle bodies. And now Uranus is in the middle of the last part of the square to all the Leos. So it's in Gemini right now, but it's going to go back into Taurus, and it's going to station in September 26, 27 Taurus. I wrote this down actually. So it's going to be squaring his ascendant one more time, or technically two more times. So there was one square exact on May 25th of this year. And then there's two other squares on January 8th of 2026 and March 1st of 2026. But basically Uranus is like stationing in the square to his midheaven in early 2026. And then it will move into a conjunction to his north node. So that's exact July 10th and November 13th of 2026 and April 29th of 2027. So this is really wild. This is an activation of not exactly his karma, but sometimes the north node is the head of the dragon, right? And it can be kind of like this head without a body. So sometimes a transit like that to the north node can like just be a blast off into something brand new on a soul level. It's in his 10th house. It is a very public place. And this is a time that it would make perfect sense if he did become president. If not that, there will be something very drastic and very public that happens for him around the time of this Uranus conjunction to his north node. And then if you've been following my work on America's third Uranus return, you might recognize that Chiron is at the degree of America's natal Uranus, or it's just 1 degree away. America's natal Uranus is 8 degrees of Gemini. So he has Chiron here. He has Uranus in a opposition to Chiron. And so transiting Uranus is going to come through and activate that at the time of America's third Uranus return. That's 2027 to 2028. The Uranus opposition in itself is like a big deal. That's kind of your classic midlife crisis transit. It's a time that, again, like radicalization happens in general for people. It can be a really powerful time when you kind of push back on the status quo of your own life. Vance is, seems like he's kind of been doing that over and over in his life. But all of this is before the elections, right? At the end of 2028. So there's just some major shifts, major, very public, very visible shifts coming in for him before then. And it's interesting that Chiron is involved. Because it also could be something that is painful for him. There could be something that happens where he's kind of scapegoated, he gets blamed for something. Definitely check out my video on America's Uranus returns if you're interested in more of this. But the last 2 Uranus returns have corresponded to America's biggest wars, the Civil War and then World War II. And there has also been major transformation in our weapons technology during both of those Uranus returns. And right now, there are a lot of new weapons that are out there that, have only kind of surfaced here and there. Maybe there are biological weapons. I mean, there definitely are biological weapons that various nations have been working on. There are definitely directed energy weapons like the long-range acoustic device or LRAD, weapons that can use microwave pulses or other forms of energy to cause a lot of pain. They have something that makes a super loud sound. They also maybe have something that like creates burns on your skin. There's weaponized surveillance like Palantir, and that really corresponds to the Gemini energy especially. There's weaponized AI, all the stuff that Israel has been using in Gaza. And, Uranus is a huge wild card, so I'm not making specific predictions about what's going to happen, but something's going to happen, right? We're not going to get through this third Uranus return with nothing happening. And, one thing that is interesting that I'm going to touch on in that third video is that China has all of these weapons. And, most Americans, unless you've done your deprogramming work, most Americans have a very propagandized understanding of China. So I'm not trying to say China is this evil, adversary that we need to protect ourselves from. That's not what I'm getting at. But China has made massive technological advances over the past couple of decades. And China also, there's a very ancient culture and tradition there that, if you're interested, check out The Art of War by Sun Tzu, and that can give you some insight into China's military approach, which is just way smarter than America's military approach. And, one of the things that stuck out to me from that little book, it's very easy to read. I actually have it on audiobook, but it's not it's just, kind of written in verse. And one of the main things that's emphasized is appear strong when you're weak, make your enemy think that you're strong, and when you're strong, make your enemy think that you're weak. So my sense is that China has a lot of defensive capacity. I don't think that China is going to preemptively attack the United States or start anything. I think China is also happy to let us do our implosion on our own and involve themselves as little as possible. But if the United States makes some preemptive attack on China, I think they very much have technological capacities that we, may not be aware of, that could be very painful for the United States. So that is just a sense that I, kind of got looking at this Chiron of J.D. Vance's, something that could happen where, the United States militarily is really caught unprepared for the level of technological advancement that China has. And that's not even getting into the possibility of advanced tech with non-human origins, which I also will touch on in the Uranus and Gemini video. So a lot more coming on all of that in that third video, although like I said, there's so much stuff that I just have to summarize. But I just do think that we're going to have our minds blown by technology during Uranus and Gemini in general, and especially during the United States Uranus return. And J.D. Vance is going to be a direct part of it, more than Donald Trump. His chart is getting these direct impacts over the next couple of years, more than Trump is. And it does kind of remind me too of when I, in mid 2023, when I looked at the charts for the 2024 presidential election, and I saw that Donald Trump's chart was directly impacted, but the Biden's chart just really didn't have anything direct going on. And then I looked at Kamala's chart, and it was super direct. That Saturn conjunct her Chiron in the 10th house, super direct transit, and that's kind of why I made that prediction early on. So this feels like something similar, where it's Vance that is getting the most play, the most activation astrologically over the next couple of years. A couple other little pieces here. Jupiter will be in Leo next year, so just expanding all of this dark energy in his 12th house. And in September of 2027, we have a Jupiter-Uranus square, and Jupiter has moved into Virgo by that point, so it's at 6 or 7 degrees Virgo. Jupiter will be exactly conjunct J.D. Vance's Mercury, and then Uranus will be right on his Chiron during that square. So that's a time to look towards also for just major significant turning points. Virgo, the kind of really dark shadow of Virgo is sadism. So that could be activated, especially if he is in a major leadership role. So, I don't know, guys. Hold on to your souls. That's all I can say. Go join the Numinous Network with Carmen Spagnola for practical collapse prep advice, like storing food and other things like that. That's not my expertise. I'm just like here to bring the bad news. But better to know, I think, better to know than to not know. Yeah, Britt said China's really doing it right and setting an example. Yeah, I think so too. That's a hard bridge for a lot of Americans to cross, though. All right. Well, let me know in the chat if you have any questions about this. In just a minute, I'll move on to our card pull. But that's the collapse news for today. Those transits are just pretty wild, right? Okay, well, if there's no questions coming through, we'll move on to our oracle card pull for this coming week. I do want to shout out the channel members here. We had our first members only live stream and live divination session yesterday, and that was just like a ton of fun. I really had a great time, and people came with personal questions. It was pretty much all personal questions, but I felt like there was such a supportive group energy that helped me to channel, and seems like the feedback was good from the messages that came through. People got a lot of support. So we'll do that again next month. Join the channel membership. It's only $2.99 a month. If you want to be a part of that, you want to hang out with other radical astro nerds, come join us. Yeah, so we'll do our card pull and then I will close with a song. As usual, we're going to get one archetype card and one alchemy card. Sherry says, I'm about to turn 62. I remember when the government used to help regular people get ahead back in the 70s and 80s. Yeah, there was always a current that was fighting against that, but there was a little kind of regenerative burst after World War II and the New Deal and all of that, especially like 50s, 60s, into the 70s, but Reagan started dismantling all of that in the 80s, and then it's just been downhill from there. So our archetype is the eternal child. And these do kind of, the cards that have come up so far, I often have not had much of a collective message, or I haven't had too much of a sense of how they speak to what's going on in the collective, but hopefully they're providing helpful personal messages for anyone who tunes in. Okay, and our alchemy card is Scintillae, Sparks of Light. So I'll read the descriptions. For the eternal child, we have the keywords of the inner child and the child of joy. The eternal child is connected to the timeless, ageless, and infinite aspects of life. It is radiant and fearless and seeks joy above all else and at any cost. It struggles being bound to an aging body with physical limitations in a world that demands attention to detail and logistics. The eternal child wants to nix all rules and responsibilities and go beyond what others say is possible. It wants to return with plenty of friends to the land of the free, where divine wine and creativity pour from the earth and sky. We all want a sip from the well of eternal youth, and this makes the eternal child naturally popular, perhaps even famous. The eternal child glimmers. It reminds us of what is possible, what is magical about this precious life. When light, the archetype is joyful, playful, accepts all, magic. When dark, addicted, selfish, adrift, and burning out. To go deeper, you could look into Icarus, Peter Pan, Rumi's Has Anyone Seen the Boy? And this archetype is so spirited that when its appetite for life isn't satiated, it seeks spirits and substance elsewhere. The eternal child struggles with addictions of all varieties. Celebrity culture is based heavily on this archetype, as is the phrase live hard, die young, and the series of artists and musicians who died at 27, at the beginning of their Saturn return, I will add. And then sparks of light. The key words are hope, sensation, and exhilaration. The scintillite card arrives just in the nick of time, leaving a trail of celestial light to guide the way. Follow these flickers as if they are alchemical clues, guiding you to an illumined state. When this card appears, it's likely that there has been a lull or void of direction in the laboratory. Some may even say the lights have been turned off. But in the deep void of darkness, a messenger of hope arrives, flickering and shimmering with enthusiasm. You might feel the scintillate as a childlike giddiness, the presence of magic, a vision in a dream, or a simple readiness to wake up from a long slumber. Follow the physical body, follow the tingling sensations of aliveness within you, and you will not be led astray. Vitality, clarity, and inspiration are within your reach. You are alive. You are a vital being. Appreciate this moment. One spark leads to the next. To go deeper, you could watch or read Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. To ponder the firework yet to be lit. And the power of this card can be increased by offering recognition and thanks to the celestial realm, the many and mighty forces of light that support the alchemist on their path. Like fireflies and fireworks, this card is linked to the spirit of summer. Well, there's a lot of Leo energy in both of these. Yeah, I agree, Britt. They do feel really comforting. Leo is associated with the fifth house, which is really the house of the inner child. Fourth and fifth, they both relate to childhood, and the fourth house is ruled by Cancer. It's connected to the moon. It really speaks to kind of the very tender part of the self, and it speaks to when you're a baby and you're completely helpless and you haven't really self-differentiated yet. But Leo and the fifth house speaks to a toddler that is discovering their individuality. It can also speak to the period in like late adolescence when people are moving out of their childhood home and they are discovering who they are in that way. And then like fifth house transits are just often a time to like pay attention to your inner child and the way that it wants to play. So anyway, there was references to, childlike energy in both of these cards, and Leo definitely has that. Leo is a very playful sign. It's a very like individuated sign. It's very expressive. So, Mercury's retrograde in Leo, the sun is going to move into Leo. We have a new moon in Leo coming up in 4 days. The new moon is opposite Pluto, so that's an interesting energy. In terms of like the eternal child, there can be something about, obviously, moon Pluto alignments are a lot of times like in a natal chart that can speak to some kind of a challenge in very early childhood where it feels like the, young self has to come up against either impermanence or power struggles or death. And so a moon Pluto alignment, like at a new moon, can also bring those themes in. And so with the inner child, it could activate some of the shadows there. There could be a, way that the universe is asking us to grow up. And the Scintillate card, the Sparks of Light card, that one's come up for me a good number of times in my personal readings. And I usually feel like it is directing me towards the spirit guides and directing me to pay attention to, the guidance and the information and the kind of flashes of insight that come in, kind of between the cracks of my own limited viewpoints. So that's also important during any Mercury retrograde, is to be listening to what are the new ideas and perspectives and narratives that are coming in. Yeah, Sun Tarot card. Yes, very much that same energy of expression, and the Yang energy. There's a reference to summer, right, in the Sparks of Light card as well, and we're just kind of in the heat of the summer right now. So yeah, hopefully there are some good personal messages for everybody in those cards as well. Let me know in the chat if there's anything else coming through to you that I didn't mention here. Okay, and last but not least, I'm going to play a song for you guys. So I'm going to introduce you to my EP. This is not any special artwork. This is just something I put together, but I felt like I wanted to share the name and the track list. I'm getting some little butterflies in the heart coming through about this. But basically, This is a collection of songs that I wrote pretty much all between 2017 to 2021. And it was a time that I was going through a very painful twin flame experience. If anybody knows what that is and has been through it, it was hugely challenging. It was also the time that my mom was dying from early onset dementia, and I was helping to take care of her. So it was a really challenging time in my life, and writing music, like channeling songs, was one of the ways that I was coping with everything that I was going through and just processing my own stuff. So mostly this is an EP of karmic love songs. Songs of karmic heartbreak, but also some triumph in there. And the name of it is The Tender Flesh Alive Beneath the Scars. That's a lyric from one of the songs. And today I'm going to play you guys the first one, called Timelines. And then over the next 6 weeks, I'll play one of these each week. Did I see you walking sadly by the side of the road? I know that you've been tired carrying such a heavy load. I know the coming through right on time. In another life, ooh, I might have died for you, but I'm alive, coming through. That is timelines. All right, my loves, thank you for being here. Thank you for all of your support. Thank you for being on the wavelength, as always. I'll stay on for just a minute in case anyone has any feedback on my song. So many blessings to you all this week. I hope that the eternal child and the sparks of light serve you well. And I will see you next Sunday, but hopefully before then with the third Uranus in Gemini video. All right. Have a good night, everyone. Bye.